Welcome to the Filmlinks Podcast,
a bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 59, Bonkers Brooks.
And we have a special guest with us today, a returning guest, Aaron Johnson. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes, welcome back. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
He was on, like, our fourth or fifth week. I don't know. He was super early.
Yeah.
But it is good to have him back.
Episode 7, the Batman series.
Oh,
Episode
yeah.
7 with Batman, and we're talking about something completely different now. So, Aaron, how about you introduce us to who we are going to be talking about today?
One of the funniest and greatest directors out there, Mel Brooks.
Right, absolutely. So just a little bit of background on Mel Brooks. He was born in 1926, and he's still around and kicking. He has had a very long career. He actually served in World War II. I just found this out when I was Wikipediaing about him, and he served defusing landmines and stuff, and that is kind of ridiculous. And he started doing stand-up comedy in nightclubs, impersonating film stars, and he also did some accompanying on the piano for singers and stuff like that, which we get a taste of in High Anxiety. Mm-hmm. And his breakout film was called The Producers in 1967, which was just this ridiculous comedy about two Broadway producers trying to make the most ridiculous and disastrous show ever, and kind of set his comedy tone for a lot of his career. But once he was established with that comedy tone, he also started getting more into the producing side of things and didn't want to just be associated with comedy. So along came a time when he wanted to produce a film that was eventually directed by David Lynch called The Elephant Man, which is by no means a comedy, not comedic at all. So he started his own production company called Brooks Films in order to kind of separate the name Mel Brooks, because Mel Brooks Presents gives you a different tone, gives you a very specific tone when you're going into a movie. But Brooks Films was kind of his studio to start producing a wide range of movies. But getting into the movies that we are talking about today, which all fall into his very comedic and, just kind of show his love for different kinds of cinemas and his ability to pick up on the nuances of them and kind of twist them and subvert our expectations in the most ridiculous and hilarious way. What are we talking about today?
Well, our first film of this week is going to be Blazing Saddles from 1974, which was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, Best Editing, and Best Original Song for Blazing Saddles, and features the return of one of the actresses who was prominent in our Bogdanovich episode, Madeline Kahn.
And she's very prominent in this episode as well, because she's in all of these films.
All of them. She's in all of them.
Including our second one, Young Frankenstein, also from 1974. This one was co-written by Gene Wilder, also starring Gene Wilder. And it was nominated for Best Writing and Best Sound. And Aaron, what is our last film for today?
The hilarious High Anxiety, which is a wonderful comedy based off of Alfred Hitchcock's work.
Which, for fans of the podcast, is a pretty good follow-up to the 5-episode series that we did on Alfred Hitchcock earlier this year.
Yeah.
So
not 5 movies, more like 15 movies,
yes,
but 5 episodes
movies.
on
there
Alfred
are a lot of
Hitchcock.
movies covered. Yeah, High Anxiety only parodies, I think, 10 Alfred Hitchcock films, somewhere around there. Although it does catch the film, the tone of all of them. It only kind of covers 10 specifically with its references. So technically we have more references than High Anxiety, but also High Anxiety is shorter than the combined length of the 5 podcast series we did. So who's really the winner there? The answer is Mel Brooks because, well, he's Mel Brooks. But,
Always.
It is what it is.
Okay, so that is our overview, but let's get started and let's talk about the insane, hilarious, and somewhat controversial Blazing Saddles. Aaron, take it away.
Oh boy, in order to accept this film, we need to acknowledge the harsh realities of racism within not just Hollywood, but America itself. But it's freaking hilarious here because not only are we dealing with Mel Brooks, but we're also dealing with the late, great Richard Pryor, who helped write this film with Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder as well. Film's basically about a corrupt politician appointing a black sheriff in like right after slavery. And the whole town's really not that happy about that.
It's almost like they don't like black people.
Oh, yeah. Kind of on the nose with that movie.
Yeah, it's a great just kind of look at this whole culture, and Cleavon Little is just so perfect for this role because out of all the things that are going on, all the terrible like racist things that the white people, that tycoon, I don't even know what he is, like the railroad guy, he's just so terrible, but Cleavon Little just like strolls into town. Everything he does with just so much just like confidence and nonchalance. Is such a stark contrast. I think one of my favorite jokes in the movie is the first one where the railroad, like, quote unquote slave drivers essentially comes up and he's like, "Come on, sing us one of your songs," and they just start doing this like this nightclub crooner. Yeah, I know. There's a word that is used in this movie more than it's used in Tarantino films.
Yeah,
and but it has to set this atmosphere. But Aaron, what is your take on how they approached the racism in this film, coming from a guy? Well, like, because the film is by Mel Brooks, who is Jewish, so he's not African American, commenting on race, but he is minority. How does the whole tone of the film come off?
The tone is basically ripping apart. Well, you have to kind of go back to how Hollywood represented a lot of different minorities, prior to like the Hays Code. So, and really even after that.
We already looked at Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah. So, it's still a very sensitive subject, but even more so then. So when you have someone like Mel Brooks who, his whole thing is about making fun of Hitler and making him the biggest joke, and then getting with Richard Pryor and then basically taking on the idea of slavery being run by these idiots. It's probably the most hilarious take because they go after a black guy who is probably the coolest one in the whole film, other than the Waco kid, played by Gene Wilder.
Yeah.
And if you even watch it, the scene where they're singing the song and he starts to sing Frank Sinatra, that kind of sets up how he is throughout the whole film. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like Bugs Bunny, which gets in that Looney Tune reference throughout the whole film.
Which there's a direct reference to it in the movie.
Music and all.
Where Cleavon Little like hands the big brute guy a box with a bomb in it, and then walks out while the Looney Tunes music is playing, and he's doing the Bugs Bunny walk, which I didn't know a person could do, but it's hilarious. And he's got his fingers in his ears and everything.
It's brilliant. It's a brilliant take on a really awful time. Plus, it really plays on to the fact that in Hollywood, because it gets really meta throughout the film, you have all of these different people who are working their butt off, and it gets to the point where it's just a cluster of actors acting a fool by the end of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the end is wonderfully meta.
There is literal fourth wall breaking, and it's one of the most amazing. Like, when I watched it for the first time, actually, Aaron, you introduced me to this movie.
That's right.
I think you wouldn't let me watch it until I could watch it with you.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to the end, I was just like, oh my gosh, I didn't know what I was expecting, but this is shocking and not surprising all at the same time.
Yeah, it's really brilliant stuff. It's the way Mel Brooks, his whole vision, because you got to remember, this is him with a little more money than he was with the producers. So he got to play around a little more with the way he treated, actors and sets. And so when they basically built up this entire set that parodies like 3:10 to Yuma, all those old school Westerns, and they just tear it all down, that's his and Richard Pryor's and everyone else's way of saying, we can have a little fun with this. We can talk about these really horrible times and look back and be like, it was a lot of idiots running around.
And the great thing is that even though this is kind of, at a lot of points, it's just kind of like whimsical fun and everything. But really throughout, there's this whole theme of acceptance because, like you said, the corrupt politician sends him in there to run everyone out of the town because he thinks that they won't accept a black sheriff. And by the end, everyone is on his side. And that's part of the joke, is that everyone that he meets just falls so in love with his charms and everything about him that, he's got the whole town on his side by the end. And then when all the railroad people come and have to like attack the town, and then, that whole climax just kind of gets undercut by the ridiculous meta-ness that we've been alluding to that I don't really want to spoil because it's such an insane twist. But, it all leads up to that. But up to that point, it's really got this theme. And Gene Wilder is like one of the greatest characters because from the beginning, I don't think he even like mentions. So I guess the first thing that he says is, wait, I don't know how it sets up, but he sees Cleavon Little come in and he's like drunk in a jail cell and he's like, "Are we awake?" And then Gene Wilder says, "I don't know. Are we black?" And Cleavon Little's like, "Yep." It's like, "All right, then we're awake." But I don't think he references his race for the entire rest of the movie. And then from that friendship and everyone else becoming friends with him, there's just this really great sense of acceptance in the context of this really intolerant time period and genre, really. It's not usually explored in this genre.
And even getting a little subtle, over the course of the film, Gene Wilder actually dresses darker and darker until the end where he's just wearing a black shirt.
Right.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know how intentional that is, but it's a nice visual touch if it is intentional. And all of the humor in this film kind of comes into this meta sense that we've been kind of talking about here. And Mel Brooks kind of approaches all of his films in a very obvious way where he's aware that it's a movie and he wants the audience to be aware that it's a movie while they're watching it.
Yeah, to the point of characters looking at the camera, making comments, as we'll see in some of the other movies, to the point of the camera becoming a character in itself. And he just does so many things. And I think that this one has the most blatant and extreme fourth wall breaking again at the very end.
Definitely.
Which again is a Looney Tunes reference.
Yeah, that's true. Because this is a Warner Brothers film.
Right.
So, they've got the right to do that. And so it even goes meta into the studio itself.
And we should also mention that Mel Brooks himself is in this movie as an actor. Granted, it's a very small role, but he's still in there. And I think at heart, Mel Brooks is very much a performer. Maybe more so than he is like a director. And that's not to say that he's not a good director. It's just that his preference for entertaining seems to be in the performing genre, and he finds a way to put himself into all of his movies. I can't remember if he's in Young Frankenstein, but he's definitely in Blazing Saddles, and he takes the lead in High Anxiety. Right. And I feel like that kind of goes back to his stand-up roots, where he was the one up there making people laugh. And he finds a way to slip that in, both for himself and for the audience's pleasure in most of his movies.
Yeah, and I think that this film is kind of a really great, again, going back to his stand-up roots, where a lot of his stand-up routine would be imitating actors and stuff. He just has a real knack for seeing the nuances of something and being able to pick those out and create something that uses them to subvert your expectations, like I was saying before. So, from the very first thing that we see, where the title burns away, like the Bonanza intro, to the Blazing Saddles song, which is like could be straight out of a classic 40s or 50s Hollywood Western. Actually, as you pointed out, Aaron, which I didn't know, sung by the guy who sings the 310 to Yuma song, which is one of my favorite Western title songs. From the starting on a really wide shot of all of these railroad workers, and then once all the credits have done rolling, after what feels like 5 minutes, we finally get into the scene. Like, just from that very first bit, the style is there. It's all set up exactly like a classic Western, and everything else just kind of rolls into it with the caricatures and because like we've been saying, it's kind of like Looney Tunes. All the characters are so exaggerated that all of these movies almost feel like watching a live action cartoon, because they're so over the top and overplayed, but in a way that is so grounded in the real Westerns that you've seen, that where they're coming from, and you can kind of just laugh at how seriously these movies take themselves sometimes.
Probably my best part is when they have every single vile person you can think of, like with the Nazis. They even have, I think, Methodists and the Klansmen.
The registration line.
Yeah, and they're just a bunch of thugs, and they're going to go in and they're going to, I think they said, kill the firstborn sons of everyone, even though it's too Jewish. Yeah, and then they're going to go in and rape and pillage an entire town just because a black guy is a sheriff.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, because that wasn't the town trying to get the sheriff out. That was just the railroad. Because they were doing all of these things just to get the railroad through this town, which is also a very quintessential Western plot.
This is ridiculous. And then and then when they get into it's this really obscure scene, but when when Sheriff Bart, when he's walking through town, as soon as he becomes sheriff, and they have Count Basie there doing a cameo with his entire bandstand doing April in Paris, that is probably my favorite part.
I was about to bring that up. Yeah, that's a great, because he literally is just walking through the desert, and then there's an entire orchestra playing the music that we're hearing. And that's something that comes up again in High Anxiety, and not as blatant, but they still make like very blatant sound cues jokes in Young Frankenstein. So it's just like nothing is off limits to Mel Brooks. And that is kind of the beauty of these movies, is that he really has free reign with whatever he wants to put in there, and he does it really well.
But he did get sued by Hedy Lamarr with this film.
Did he really?
Oh, really?
Yeah, she sued him
there's literally a joke about Hedy Lamarr suing somebody in this film.
They put that in there last minute just to get at her.
Oh, gosh. That's great. You know what? If you're going to go down, better go down swinging.
Yeah.
And I guess since we brought up Madeline Kahn, and she's in all these movies, we should bring up her character, which is she's the, I don't know, like the... How do you describe her character? She's the town female performer or something. But her whole like performance is literally just her saying, "I'm so tired of love. I'm so tired. I'm so tired," over and over and over again. And not in a seductive way at all. It's really kind of just raspy and slow and trudging. And just all the guys are just so hopped up on it, and it's just the most ridiculous contrast.
Well, the contrast is pretty funny, but also if you were in that situation where you lived in a town where there were almost no single women, and you were a cowboy working long days,
and
that's part of the joke too. Is like it really doesn't take much. And the other thing about the town is that everyone in the town is named Johnson. Like all. So yeah, that's kind of
Howard Johnson,
subtle.
Richard Johnson.
Every single person.
Everyone.
And also this entire film kind of functions kind of as a parody. I don't want to call it pastiche, but I think it leans more towards the parody side of that spectrum, where it's making fun of whatever it's copying rather than paying homage to it. Of the Western genre in general, which also had, a lot of racism in it, not only in the way the characters acted, but also like in the way it was cast, the way Hollywood treated it, so on and so forth. You can find plenty of books on the topic. Anyway, but this film kind of tackles a whole genre for parodying, and Mel Brooks did like to parody a lot of things in a lot of his films. And as we'll see over the course of today, whether it's the fact that he's parodying a genre or parodying a specific film series or parodying a specific director, he kind of takes inspiration from his work, from other work that's around, and then puts a twist on it to make it fun and entertaining in his own way.
Right.
Yeah, and puts his own fingerprints on it, which is usually that meta element. That seems to be kind of one of the running things that classifies it as a Mel Brooks film, is like this kind of wink, wink, nod, nod towards the audience the whole time. Like, he hasn't forgotten that you're just watching a silly movie, and he's gonna have his characters let you know that.
Yeah,
Right.
which, as we've discussed on the podcast before, if there's one thing film lovers really like, it's meta movies. So
Right.
I think this his canon finds a special place in the heart of cinephiles everywhere for that reason.
Definitely.
And Aaron, I don't know, what do you know about how the Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder relationship started? I don't know a whole lot about that, but it seems pretty strong throughout his whole career, and this is a really great example of that.
I actually think they may have known each other before, but when Gilda Radner, Gene Wilder's, I think, third wife, when she was on SNL, a little before that, they all kind of knew each other. And somewhere along the way, he convinced him to do the producers. Mel convinced Gene Wilder to do producers. And when they did that, Gene Wilder was just like on cloud nine, even though everybody was like, what the heck are you doing? But what's crazy is that during this film, everything, we've basically talked about how, all the winks and the nods and the DNA that Mel Brooks puts in his films. Gene Wilder saw that, and he hit him up with an idea, and he's like, hey, Mel, I have this idea for a movie. It's basically a parody of Frankenstein. And Mel Brooks was like, there are too many movies out there already. He's like, no, but this would be hilarious.
Uh-huh.
And that's when I think that's really when they kind of started their like friendship till the day Gene Wilder died. I think that's really when right after Blazing Saddles, because before then it was just very professional. And I think on this one, as soon as Gene Wilder hit him up with an idea for a screenplay, they were inseparable.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's a good transition into Young Frankenstein, because there's a lot of Gene Wilder in Young Frankenstein, because he stars in it. And as you've been saying, that kind of kicked it off.
Oh,
Frankenstein. Yes. We have to make sure we get it right. But
right.
At least at the beginning is Frankenstein. And then maybe we can discuss it later. So basically, Gene Wilder plays Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, and he's a professor at a college teaching neuroscience, shockingly.
Shockingly.
And one of the students keeps asking him about his great-grandfather's experiments with the monster, because basically it's common knowledge that his great-grandfather had created Frankenstein's monster, and so that is the Frankenstein story that we know is basically history in this film. And Frankenstein is approached with his great-grandfather's will, which bequeaths to him this big scary mansion in Transylvania, I believe. So he goes over there and he meets with Igor, who is the great-grandson of Dr. Frankenstein's Igor. And so they go into this house and they meet the housekeeper, Frau Blücher. Someone give me a horse noise.
I can't do it.
Thank you. Played by Cloris Leachman, who we've seen before in The Last Picture Show, and she'll appear again in High Anxiety. And also, Inga shows up, and she's just kind of there to to put another female into this whole crazy equation. But yeah, it's got all the tropes that you think of in classic B monster movies and German expressionism, where we have big creepy house, we have creepy characters who are not saying very much. Dr. Frankenstein doesn't believe in any of this reanimation stuff until he finds his way down to his great-grandfather's laboratory, and he finds the books and all of the notes on the experiments, and he's like, we can do this. And so they steal a body from the grave, this very large person, and Igor goes to steal a brain of this very smart scientist and drops it, and he picks up the brain of someone else, an Abby something, Abby Normal? Abby Normal?
Which is actually pretty close to what actually happened in the original Frankenstein?
Yeah. Right.
Wow, now I'm messing it up. Okay, anyway.
So he brings this abnormal brain and is basically what makes the monster all grunting and everything. So then, we're back to repeating the normal Frankenstein story, but, with the Mel Brooks touch on all of these tropes and things. So the monster breaks out, he meets the little girl, he meets a blind old man, and then the town starts coming after him, and we have Kenneth Mars as the town inspector, who has this like robotic arm, and we've seen him before too in What's Up, Doc. There's a lot of Bogdanovich actor crossovers in all of these movies actually, but yeah, he plays Hugh in What's Up, Doc. So anyway, he leads the charge to kill the beast. Oh, sorry, wrong movie. And they like storm the castle, but through all this, Frankenstein finds a way to help the monster by showing him love. That is what he needs. And through doing this, he's able to make him a cultured and civilized man. And eventually he ends up sharing part of his intelligence with the monster and all that. But, through all of this, really what you're there for is all of the genre jokes and the very specific references to the classic 1930s Frankenstein franchise, really, the whole series of Frankenstein movies.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about with the different sorts of parodying, even though parody is like a central theme of Mel Brooks's canon. He kind of takes a different approach to it in each movie he does. And in Blazing Saddles, it was the entire Western genre, but in this one, it's just the Frankenstein movies, very specifically.
There is so much in this film. Let me see. I think Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks almost got into a fist fight on the set because...
Oh, good. What about?
Believe it or not, it was the putting on the Ritz scene.
Oh, really?
Huh.
Yeah. That's the dance number that Frankenstein has with his monster after he's cultured him and basically made him a Broadway star.
Which actually ended up having this movie put on Broadway because, of course...
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Young Frankenstein's on Broadway.
Young Frankenstein on Broadway.
They just
Sorry, that was
Blazing
random.
Saddles. They just need Blazing Saddles on Broadway.
Good luck getting that approved.
I think... Oh, yeah. So I think this was the film by Mel Brooks that didn't have him in it. They actually, when they were writing it, Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks both made a deal that Mel wouldn't appear anywhere in it unless he did voices only. I think he's the cat and like some of the citizens' voices, but he's not actually in the film because he was like, Mel, you hog the spotlight way too much. Just let me have this one movie.
He is a ham.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's so charming about him, but
Yeah, and it was hilarious. And it's just a lot of different meta things that show up. I think this is the film, other than Blazing Saddles, where a lot of the gags from later films like Men in Tights and Dracula Dead and Loving It, and I think even High Anxiety, where a lot of the gags show up in later films, like with Igor, his hump. Marty Freeman, the actor, he kept moving it back and forth, and they could never get one take where it just stays in a spot, so they just kept a gag where his hump moved from one side to the next, or it was just completely gone.
Oh, God.
And Gene Wilder points it out. He's like, wasn't that on the other side? Yeah, and then like I was saying, there's that audio cue where every time they say Frau Blücher, there's this horse neighing, and everyone looks around, they're like, what? And there's actually several times where there'll be a sound cue and everyone just kind of like looks up to the ceiling or looks at the camera or something. And then they don't acknowledge it. They just like, with a look, they're like, what? Where did that come from?
Yeah, that mostly comes from Gene Wilder. His whole thing was like, because the whole idea was that this might be the last movie they get to work on, just because, believe it or not, the producers and Willy Wonka, I think, were 2 box office failures at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they were like...
It's ironic in the case of the producers.
They were just like, this may be the last movie we get to do together, so let's go in.
So did this film kind of like save them from that because of its reception? Yeah,
it made... I think they were on a budget of like 2... almost 3 million, and they made back like 86 million. So they were fine.
So I haven't seen the original Frankensteins, which is something that I really need to catch up on.
Oh, man.
But if you guys have seen them, and I know Alex has seen some of them, if not all of them,
I've seen all the good ones.
What are some of the specific references? Because I recognized Madeline Kahn's hair changing with the white stripes and everything. I know that's from Bride of Frankenstein.
That's from Bride of Frankenstein. Oh my gosh, I can't say it anymore. This movie,
Frankenstein?
Frankenstein. I don't know. Anyway, so the little girl is a specific reference. Frankenstein being on display, I believe, is a specific reference. The blind man is a specific reference. Of course, the servant with the hump is a specific reference. The horse thing is not a specific reference, but it's funny nonetheless. And that's all the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Of course,
and I guess we should say, just like as a general comment, that this film is in black and white, so it's and it's got all the big architecture and the shadows and everything, so it's got that original like German expressionism theme throughout it, just visually.
Oh yeah. It's very, very good at mimicking the look and feel of the original Frankenstein. Of course, with the clarity of film stock from the 70s rather than from the 30s, and the benefit of being preserved rather than being left somewhere on a shelf at Universal to rot.
Right. But we should also talk about the monster, because the monster is really, I don't know, he's such an interesting character. Like, he's so sympathetic, which you don't like.
He's so sympathetic in the original movies too.
True.
Yeah, and that's part of his character. But I mean, there's even a scene where Gene Wilder kind of just like describes all of his characteristics, and it's really true. It's like, look at your baby face and your giant build and everything. He's like, you're a god, and it's really interesting. Like there's even that theme of acceptance going through this film too. But I feel like you're almost more sympathetic to the monster in this film than in the normal story, because normally you've just got all these angry people going after him to kill him for no reason. But in this film, you have a bunch of well-intentioned people accidentally doing him harm, like the blind man, which is from one of the original films, that idea of a scene. But in this film, since he's blind, he's doing all this stuff like pouring hot soup into his lap repeatedly, or lighting his thumb on fire instead of his cigar, and all this kind of stuff. And so you're almost like, oh my gosh, just leave him alone, even more than if there's this whole angry mob chasing him, because it's unintentional.
Yeah, and that blind man scene, actually, almost beat by beat, is exactly what happens. Yeah. Except they put a comedic twist on everything that happens. In fact, if you were to play the original Frankenstein alongside Young Frankenstein, it would almost line up minute by minute if once you get out of the college scenario. And it would be a masterclass if you really want to get down and study on how to parody in a very funny, non-aggressive, non-demeaning way an original work, and to take it and twist it and parody it in a really funny, charming, respectful manner.
Yeah.
Literally going beat by beat through that script.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Right.
I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but it's a good project for anyone who wants to do that. Tweet me about it.
Aaron, do you have any thoughts or like production tidbits about this movie?
Well, the blind man was played by Gene Hackman, and that's probably the greatest
That was Gene
character.
Hackman?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't even know.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't even know how he got him.
That must have been nice for him. He hated playing mean characters, and he always had to play mean characters.
Yeah, he had a blast with that. I think him and Mel were friends. I just really enjoy this film. It's I think this is actually the first Mel Brooks film I saw in the history of ever.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, so it holds a special place in my heart. And I just
and it just clicked with
really
your sense
fun.
of humor.
Of course. I think this and Looney Tunes shaped my sense of humor.
Yeah, because you have a very meta sense of humor, and I can definitely see how that comes out of Looney Tunes and Mel Brooks stuff.
Yeah. And then Blazing Saddles just put me over the edge.
Solidified it with all of the race humor.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
which is funny because it's this interesting thing in Blazing Saddles, which when I was starting to get to know you, like I don't know how to describe it, but you use race as like a tool for humor, and it doesn't feel like out of place or
right.
you know, or I don't know. It's not tone deaf, but it's using this really terrible aspect of our culture that's real, and just showing how ridiculous it is. And I think that's hilarious. And so, like, yeah, all of these movies, I think, just sum up the humor that I've gotten to know in you just from knowing you.
So this is why we need to all thank Mel Brooks personally, because yeah, if it wasn't for him, we all wouldn't know each other. Boom.
Yeah,
And he's still around, actually. He's still kicking.
Yeah.
He's like 90 something.
he's 91, right? It's insane.
He's having like a final screening thing, he's calling it, in Hollywood. I think pretty soon, like within the next couple months. Just I don't know if it's actually called the final screening, but that's what I heard it described, probably because he's 91. Not to be morbid, but I think Mel Brooks would like to find the humor in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on to our final film of the day, High Anxiety from 1977, which is a parody of all of Alfred Hitchcock's films. Which,
I would start singing it.
High Anxiety. I don't
go.
actually remember anything about it. I remember the movie. I don't remember the song. Sorry.
It was a great song, though.
It was a wonderful song. It was nominated.
And like, it almost felt like Mel Brooks showing off, but he did such a good job that I didn't care.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of ham moments in this film. And this film, for the people who say that Mel Brooks lost his touch at a certain point, this is the film where they point the finger at, and they're like, this is where it started to go downhill. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but I do feel like he hams it up a little bit more in this movie than he did in the past. But all of the references are just so clever, especially for anybody who likes film, likes Alfred Hitchcock, which is most people who are interested in film.
Absolutely.
Then this film is a real treat and a real fun time to sit down and watch it through and pick up on everything that you know because you sat through film class. Or our Alfred Hitchcock series. But anyway, High Anxiety tells the story of a professor played by Mel Brooks who flies to the West Coast for the first time. He's moving there to run an insane asylum after the last head of the insane asylum died under mysterious circumstances. Yeah, Jonathan, your job is just going to be to sit back there and shout out what's being referenced when.
Yeah. Spellbound is the first and most blatant one.
Yeah. Yeah. And
which is interesting because it's not one of the most prominent Hitchcock films.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
Anyway, he gets to the insane asylum, and clearly something's fishy. There's this weird, crazy nurse lady who I can't remember her name. She just terrified me to look at her. And along with the other snobby head doctor there, who is played by the guy who played the corrupt railroad person in Blazing Saddles. Who are clearly up to something. There's the chauffeur who literally introduces him as being like, "I'll be your sidekick for this adventure,"
Right.
and kind of sticks around. He's always taking photos of things for no apparent reason, which is
Rear
kind
window.
of and it's always kind of a joke. It's kind of a joke about how good Alfred Hitchcock is at setting stuff up unobtrusively early in a film that's going to be important later. But in this case, they really call attention to it. Like, I just take photos of everything. I have my own dark room, and I just do it really early in the film. And of course, as this professor is working at this insane asylum, he meets his old mentor, and he really notices that something's fishy is going on, and he kind of gets caught up in it, starts investigating it. He ends up going off to a psychology conference, I believe it was, where a bunch of people got together and talk about psychology, as you do, PsychoCon.
Which for some reason reminded me of the political rally in the 39 Steps.
It really reminded the floor area reminded me of the UN set for North by Northwest.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the joke with the big hotel lobby, just like huge architecture.
Also, the fact that he got he was framed for murder with a photo.
Extremely blatant.
Extremely blatantly. There's like a mysterious hired gun guy who really gets off on killing people, who's involved in all of this.
That seemed like a Frenzy reference with that mouth breathing killer.
Yeah, and we have Madeline Kahn come back in as the love interest in this film, whose father is locked away in the asylum somewhere as well. And she kind of plays a Hitchcock woman in a lot of ways, making fun of a lot of them, how they seem to get off on danger almost. Like in To Catch a Thief, for instance, Grace Kelly is very much attracted to the way in which Cary Grant is a bad guy in that movie. We have a wonderful, maybe the highlight of the movie is the entire newspaper plot that leads up to the psycho shower scene, which we will have a chance to explain here in a minute.
Yeah, I didn't know where that was going every time that guy freaked out. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is what we've been leading up to.
Yeah. And the setup was very, very blunt, and I didn't quite understand where it was going. And then the payoff was just wonderful. It was just great.
Brilliant.
And of course, it's a Hitchcock movie at the end. Well, it's not a Hitchcock movie, and that's the point. But it is a Hitchcock movie, and that's also the point. But by the end, he's saved the day. He's safe. He gets the girl. They're up on a bell tower, much like Vertigo. And in fact, High Anxiety itself is a reference to the fact that the doctor has a fear of heights. And every time that he gets near a high place, he literally freaks out and has like this vision. Or the way it's displayed to us on screen is him falling into these concentric black circles. It's not a spiral, but it's concentric black circles, which is a direct parody of the kind of avant-garde way of showing Jimmy Stewart's fear of heights in Vertigo. Along with the fact that somebody got pushed off a bell tower at the end. And she was kind of dressed, the woman who gets pushed off the bell tower at the end was also kind of dressed like the nun that appears at the end of Vertigo. So
yeah, but it was like a witch costume, and then she falls off and has a broomstick.
Yeah. Which is just completely slapsticky and very, very Mel Brooks. But in this case, he, instead of parodying an entire genre or an entire film series, he's just parodying an entire director, his entire work, which is a very, very cinephile thing to do. And I don't know whether or not it connected to audiences that well at the time, but I think it's held up pretty well, especially for those of us who like to study film. You inevitably end up studying Hitchcock, and this one is there along the path.
I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that this came out so close to, Hitchcock's prime years and everything. So I don't know if people had enough time to process Hitchcock's work by the time that this came out, and maybe it plays better now. So
apparently, Mel Brooks had a private screening of High Anxiety for Alfred Hitchcock before it was premiered to the world, and Alfred Hitchcock just kind of walked out of the screening at the end without saying anything. And Mel Brooks was super worried for like a week, and then a box of fine bottled wines showed up for Mel Brooks from Alfred Hitchcock, along with a note saying like, "Well done, I wish I had made that." So he liked it. He liked it quite a bit.
Actually, I was looking for something. I know I wasn't crazy about this. So actually, in a really funny turn of events, the reason why Hitchcock did all of this was really just screwing with Mel Brooks. So in a really obscure documentary, I think it used to be on the Biography Channel, if anybody remembers that, they were talking about his work.
Channel?
Yeah, that was way back in the day.
Toddlers and tiaras.
That was way back in the day. He actually went to Alfred Hitchcock with the idea because I guess Mel Brooks just was like, why not? So he went to him, and I think they actually sat down and wrote parts of the script together.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like he did like 45 minutes of work or something, and Hitchcock he said, look, I don't want credit, just make sure you have this in there, make sure you have the Birds references, please have the Birds references. And I think that's probably the funniest part.
And it's I love how so non sequitur the Birds reference is with like anything else in the film.
It came out of nowhere.
It's like the parodies are almost are almost episodic in the way they happen in this film.
Yeah, because he sits down on the bench and there's that, like the same jungle gym from the Birds, but I didn't even think about it until a bird landed on it.
Which kind of goes back to that Looney Tunes reference.
Yeah, and then the birds start chasing him, but instead of attacking him, they all just poop on him.
I think what sticks out to me the most is that bellboy with the newspaper, because that is, I hope I get his name right, Barry Levinson? I think that's his name. For anyone that doesn't know, he is the director of Rain Man, Good Morning Vietnam, Sleepers, and a bunch of other films. But I think him and I don't know if it was Madeline Kahn or somebody, like they were friends, and when she was like, I'm doing a Mel Brooks movie, he's like, can I be on there, please?
Yeah, for anybody interested in comedy, that sounds like a pure gold opportunity. Yeah. It's nice that he gets in there.
Yeah, so it's like that scene, I think this is one of the less Looney Tunes-ish, like it's more parody, like when a lot of people say this is when he lost his his touch or something, which I highly disagree with. This kind of ran more as parody, like with the Looney Tunes style, where it's like episodic, like you guys were talking about a little earlier, where it's just like here's a bit right here and here's a bit right here, and I really think it works in this just because, we're talking about Hitchcock and he's got so many movies. So many movies. And he basically is his own genre at this point.
And I love how apparent that is when you watch this film. One of the things we always talk about is you can do anything you want in a film as long as it works within the rules and tone and setting of the film that you've built. Like you can't step out of that setting or it'll confuse you. And you don't realize how good Hitchcock is at that until you watch High Anxiety and you realize just how stylized he is. When it's being done by a different director, and it just in a way that's intentionally meant to make the style stick out, and you realize like, whoa, this does really stick out. Like, wow, because it all fits together so seamlessly when you just watch a Hitchcock film, but when you watch a parody of it, you notice notice just how strong the sense of style is.
Right. Plus, I think he breaks the fourth wall more in here than in Young Frankenstein.
Yeah, whenever the camera like literally goes through the wall or through a door.
Yeah, it like breaks the glass. It doesn't even become a thing.
Yeah.
Like it just happens.
Yeah. One of my favorite jokes in the movie is when one of the guys in this plot or whatever, he's standing there and we have the shadow from the window behind him with all of these spokes coming out, and he just yells, "I feel like I'm caught in a web." And that's all that's said, but you can see like this shadow that looks like a web behind him. And it's just a joke on how intentional Hitchcock is about his production and how many like symbols and images and meanings he puts into things. But it was just like one of those really great things. One of the other things that was kind of funny was when the camera is below this transparent table and they keep putting things down, covering their faces on the table just for like minutes and minutes, and the camera is constantly moving trying to see them, and they keep putting stuff down over it. And you know, it's not even like a very specific thing, but it kind of alludes to stuff like The Lodger, whenever he came up with the trick to show someone's feet under a glass just to get that point across. And there's some of the really extreme angles that he did. So yeah, there's so many things that are just kind of sprinkled in there. Like even one transition to someone swirling a brandy snifter, which is almost a direct transition taken out of Rear Window when they're all thinking up a plan and swirling brandy, to another transition where it just it does this red wash, kind of like in Marnie or something like that.
And you can't forget the so on the nose reference, I think, where he's like, "Meet me at North by Northwest Corner."
I did catch that.
I was just like, man.
Oh man, yeah. And Madeline Kahn is dressed up in she's dressed in like this gray suit, right, the entire time.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Which is a direct reference to Vertigo.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's so many, like it would take us all day to go through all of the references. I started writing them down, but there's just too many. And
I think that's the beauty. I think that's what he and Hitchcock were kind of getting at, is like, you could and I think they were talking about making a sequel to this, and it just never happened because they were just saying there's so many references and things that Hitchcock innovated within his own movies that you just can't possibly do in one film.
Yeah. And we spent what, 5 episodes talking about all of the tropes that Hitchcock made that are unique to him.
Right.
But there's just so many opportunities to just take his own little like personal movie language and just parody it. Like they could do a whole nother movie just parodying Hitchcock's black and white films, because there's almost a whole different dynamic within those.
Plus the song, you can't not.
Yeah, the song is great.
Right. So we've talked about humor and comedy before on this podcast. Not as much as we talk about drama, just because that seems to be, I don't know, the cinephile way. But I don't think we've talked about meta humor nearly as much as we have during this episode. And I think it kind of,
we talk about meta themes a lot, but nothing as blatant as this.
Yeah, nothing as blatant as this. And this is kind of, it's almost taboo in a way to do too much meta, but not when it comes to Mel Brooks. Right. He's made a whole style out of it that is recurrent throughout his films, and it's really, really nice to watch, and very enjoyable to see. And as we mentioned before, it's something that is especially enjoyable for those of us who like to study the films who he is parodying.
Absolutely. I think just as a shameless self-plug, just as a writer, I can really appreciate the meta humor because, like I said, growing up with like Looney Tunes and different things like that. Because I mean, I love me some Disney, but Looney Tunes is so much better. The humor where it's kind of a nod, but even then, like even if you watch his films, starting from the producers and going even right here to High Anxiety, if you kind of notice his meta humor kind of goes like to a certain peak and then slowly goes down. I think I can really appreciate that just because you have a lot of winks and nods to the camera, but you still have these rules set in universe where it's still a very coherent story, except for Blazing Saddles, because I think that just goes completely above and beyond with the meta humor, and it works perfectly with that. But I can really appreciate, just kind of ignite, like when with Frau Blucher and you have the horse noises, or even with the camera shots, little things here and there, they really kind of keep you engaged, and it's like we're in on this joke that the characters aren't. And I think that goes back to a TV show that Mel Brooks did. I think it was Get Smart. That kind of humor just really...
Oh, Mel Brooks did that?
Yeah. He was... I don't know if
that
he
makes
was
sense.
One of the writers. He was like a writer and a producer, and that kind of propelled him to do more movies. And it just, meta humor is just, when done right, it's so hilarious.
Yeah. And it, like, aside from taking you out of the film, which it's kind of intended to do, it adds to, the whole comedy and the whole just like sense that this film knows what it is. It's not,
Right.
It's not taking itself too seriously. It knows that you're just sitting around watching a movie. And as in the case of Blazing Saddles, it knows the whole system because it points out very blatantly that, you've got one movie of a bunch of cowboys doing stuff literally feet away from another movie about a bunch of guys dancing around a water fountain or something like that.
Yeah, and somehow Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein came out in the same year, and I'm still not sure how that happens. It's a lot of work to do in a short amount of time.
Yeah, movie magic.
But I guess we should also kind of talk about this, like we've talked about with a lot of directors before, but this whole conglomeration of people that just seem to follow Mel Brooks everywhere, because all of these movies have at least 3 actors that can connect them. Between Madeline Kahn and Cloris Leachman and Mel Brooks himself and Gene Wilder and Harvey Korman, there's all these people that just love working with Mel Brooks and are just as much as of the fabric of Mel Brooks films as any of these tone or style things.
I think all of that could really be summed up in a film. I think people say that's his last good film, History of the World Part 1. He said,
I love that movie.
Yeah, when he said it's good to be the king, I think that really kind of puts it home. Like he just, nobody at that time in like the late 60s, early 70s, nobody wanted to just make parodies and talk about a lot of the atrocities, without holding some sort of candle. And when you have this Jewish guy saying, I'm going to make fun of Hitler with a song and dance number and some hippies.
Which is a big part of the producers for anyone who doesn't know. That right there kind of solidifies his little section in Hollywood. And then as soon as you just jump to like Blazing Saddles and things like that, that kind of makes him very unique compared to a lot of different directors at that time. And it's just this... It to me, it basically is like SNL before SNL was, thought of in 75. It really kind of placed that we're going to make fun of something and it's going to be hilarious attitude.
Yeah, just thinking about the cultural influence of a decade. Mel Brooks's idea of comedy certainly helped influence and nearly dominate what was funny in the 70s. Which helped influence what SNL, which came out of the 70s, became, which helped influence the next several decades of comedy up to today. So, but both through his own films and the own people he's inspired, Mel Brooks's brand of humor has found a way to live on and continue to influence the world around us, even now when he's 91 and no longer making movies.
Right. And God, I think the last thing he's been in was Hotel Transylvania 3. So that should let you know. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wait. They made 3 of those?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's out here. So, everyone still has a tremendous amount of respect for this man. He is definitely a trendsetter.
All right, so Aaron, we've had you on now to talk about Batman and Mel Brooks' meta humor. What are you going to do with that?
Well, I'm going to make Lego Batman 2, obviously.
I guess that's true. Lego Batman is a pretty meta comedy look at Batman. So that could very much be the combination of Batman and Mel Brooks.
I'll just make it more Mel Brooks.
Yes,
I'll get
by
Christopher
putting Mel
Nolan.
Brooks in it. We need a Lego Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks is Alfred. Boom. There you go.
As a 91-year-old Alfred?
Yes.
Okay, that sounds okay.
All right, are we ready to talk about next week, Alex?
So next week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the genre of westerns. We're going to be covering Stagecoach from 1939. We're going to be covering The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966. And we're going to be covering Django Unchained from 2012. All sorts of westerns from all sorts of decades, kind of covering different eras and different incarnations, maybe, of the genre.
Yeah.
From the golden age of Hollywood with Stagecoach and John Ford and John Wayne, to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the spaghetti, pulpy 60s and 70s of Western movies, and to the modern incarnation of Western movies with Django Unchained, which is very stylized by Quentin Tarantino. Going to be our first Tarantino film on the podcast, I believe. And it's a genre that doesn't get nearly as much play these days as it used to, but it is still one of the most recognizable and maybe one of the most important genres to have ever graced the silver screen. And it'll be a lot of fun to talk about it next week.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of westerns already in relation to Kurosawa and some other things like even Korea, but we've never taken a whole episode to just focus on, what does it mean to be a Western film? So that is going to be our focus.
My favorite Korea.
Right. Manchurian Western, which we did not know was a thing until we got The Good, the Bad, the Weird, which was great. So I'm super excited. I love Westerns. I know it's one of those genres that some people kind of tune out, but I think there's a lot of good stuff to talk about.
Yeah. And you know what? It's been an absolute blast having Aaron Johnson back on the podcast to talk about one of the funniest directors who we've ever covered. And it's also been a blast to have a Jonathan on the podcast who's slowly losing his voice, but he's been trooping through it like the trooper he is. He's doing a wonderful job. So if you're at home, ladies and gentlemen, please give him a round of applause. We will pretend that we hear
Thank
that.
you.
And that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I'm at AaronMichael_J.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks for being on with us, Aaron. Always a pleasure.
No problem. Always. Definitely.
Thanks, Aaron. You're the best.
I know. It's good to be the king.
Actually, what happened to your voice, though, man?
I got sick on Wednesday. It was like this weird thing where I just wasn't really feeling good at work. And then, honestly, like through the duration of watching Young Frankenstein, I started feeling better. So Young Frankenstein like restored me to health somehow. But after that, I just had a really sore throat and I was coughing a lot yesterday. and it's catching up with me right now, apparently.
Well,
Too much talking. Because it was not this bad when we started this podcast.
Oh, I thought you just picked up smoking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just been chain smoking for this whole thing. I've been watching too much Rod Serling.
I knew it.